SnowTrax is brought to you by Polaris. Think outside. Ski-Doo. Winter lovers, get out there and experience that Ski-Doo feeling. And by Hercules Tire. Ride on our strength.
After last season's hugely successful 600 class shootout, it became very clear to us that our viewers sure do love a shootout.
And when we argue with each other.
And we didn't argue on the last one.
No, we were pretty in harmony there.
Not this time.
No, not this time.
So we thought today we're going to bring you guys the highest tech 850 naturally aspirated shootout. So we've got, what sleds do we got?
We have the MXZ XRS with SMART-SHOX on it, and they're 850 naturally aspirated. We have the Arctic Cat ZR 858 stroker catalyst with ATAC, and we have the Polaris VR1 850 naturally aspirated with DYNAMIX. All 137s.
All 137s. These are as equal as you can get from each manufacturer. There are obviously some differences.
And they all have the best screen.
They all have the highest tech displays as well. So basically any technology that you can get, you do get with these sleds.
Yep.
We chose not to do turbos specifically
because it would have
been fair for Arctic Cat, and we wanted to include the new 858 in this whole thing. So yeah, we're going to divide this up into a number of different categories. We're going to talk about our opinions on those categories, and then we're going to give a 1, 2, 3 rating, and then at the end you're going to find out which one we think is overall the best. So
there we go.
Let's get going.
Okay, so let's get out of the way what hasn't changed, which is the engines. I mean, yeah, the Arctic Cat's new, but really technology-wise, these are all the same as they were previous.
Well, the Polaris and the Ski-Doo are the same 850s that we've had all along. There's no changes there at all. Obviously, the 858 is all brand new.
Yep.
So this is the first time we could actually line these 3 sleds up. We took these 3 sleds out on the trail.
Back to back,
and we switched back to back. You and I actually drove up the trail following each other immediately without even showing the sleds off, jumped on the other 2 and went back down the same section of trail and did that over and over and over.
Yeah.
You can't get more direct comparison than what we did.
Head to head.
Yeah, so you can argue with our findings, but I think they're pretty trustworthy. Yeah. And at the end of the day, when it came to power, what were your opinions?
Putting that extra 8 at the end of this thing really told me this is going to be...
It came with promises.
It did, and I know that Polaris now has the 9R, and it's even bigger, but I thought that this was going to be #1 in the power category. And unfortunately, it just isn't. It's number 3.
I will say it's incredibly smooth.
It's the smoothest engine that Arctic Cat has ever made, hands down.
Absolutely.
2-stroke. It's definitely the best.
It's refined, it's clean, it idles
doesn't shake too much or vibrate too much. It's
very little vibration. It's a really, really nice motor.
Yes.
Just when you put it up against these 2, it just doesn't have the grunt that you're looking for, and that was really surprising.
The problem is that these 2 engines have had a lot of time to refine, and they've gotten to probably their sweetest points at current. Now, in model year 2024 previous, we knew which one was faster. We knew the Polaris had an edge on the 850 E-Tech. Now, if you're talking all-encompassing of the engine, which one is the smoothest running, most fuel efficient, most oil efficient? The E-Tech is. So, you know, it gets a nod there. Which one is the most aggressive, most powerful, and definitely feels like it's hitting the hardest? The Patriot 850
and
gets
honestly, I say this a lot. I really feel like in the 850 class, you got to have a motor that has some attitude. You got to have a motor that has some sound to it, that gives you a little bit. But I want a motor that says, hey, I'm 850 cc's.
And I'm here to...
You need to respect this. And the Polaris gives you all of that.
There's a mid-range on that where it goes ba-wah, and it stands up, and it does that. It makes that exact noise in my head. I make that sound in my head when it's doing it. Ba-wah, and it just pulls, it lifts, and it feels really good. And so, I mean, I don't think there's any argument here that the Polaris gets #1, the Ski-Doo comes second. If you're really focused on fuel efficiency and really smooth linear power, you probably will like the Ski-Doo better than the Polaris. But if you want that aggressive 850, you know, guy who's out there just punching as hard as he possibly can, the Polaris wins it for sure. And unfortunately, the Arctic Cat comes in third. But it is the first year for it. So let's give it a little time. Maybe there's more under the hood that they can pull out of that, and maybe in the future years it'll step up and be a bit more.
SnowTrax is brought to you by Widescape, the ultimate snowmobile for enduro adventures.
So moving on from here, I think we gotta go right into the technology, which suspension and gauges and how everything interacts from there really is the technology. And that's why this is the high-tech 850 shootout. So
I think we should talk about the technology first, then we can talk about how the technology affects the suspension when we talk about suspension.
Sure, and maybe what we'll do is we'll start with the AIRTIMES, because at the end of the day, the AIRTIMES has the least technology when it comes to suspension.
It does, yes, and there's no faulting it for that. It's not, no. It's not meant.
It doesn't claim to be what these two are. It's not a SMART-SHOX system. It is essentially saving you the time of getting off your snowmobile and adjusting your clickers manually.
Yeah.
That's what it does. That's what ATAC does.
Yeah. It just makes it so when the trail's smooth, you can click it down and have super soft, and when it's really bumpy, you can click it up.
Which is really nice, because trying to get to those rear skid clickers on any snowmobile is a task. That's a task. So that's where the AIRTIMES sits. Now, SMART-SHOX we knew about before, and SMART-SHOX is shock position sensors, so they get both rebound and compression because there's those shock position sensors. They have a
throttle and brake,
sensor.
steering position.
Yep. But it's only 3 shocks. It's only the rear arm shock.
That's, to me, that's the biggest thing about SMART-SHOX versus DYNAMIX, is that there's 3 shocks there. Yes, you get rebound, but you don't get front arm. You don't get front arm on the AIRTIMES either.
No, it's
we are
shock
adjusting
as well.
only the rear arm shock, and to me, that is a very big mistake.
Yeah,
I think
so the new player in the game has brought all 4 shocks involved in DYNAMIX.
Yeah, and I mean, just because it doesn't have rebound doesn't mean this isn't high tech. This uses an IMU, or an inertial measurement unit.
Yep.
Which takes the place of a bunch of sensors as far as Polaris is concerned.
Has a throttle and a brake sensor as well.
It does have a throttle and brake sensor, but Polaris's claim is that because of how the IMU works, this can adjust faster than that can. It doesn't need to have shock movement to know what to do, because the vehicle movement is telling it what to do.
Yeah.
So whether I can't quantify that. I'm not an engineer.
No.
But that's what Polaris claims. I think that the front arm shock puts this ahead of that, just because it's adjusting.
Well, that was already the best handling front suspension in the business. Yes. This was the best handling rear suspension. Nobody's going to argue that point. DYNAMIX really did take it up another level. It made it better, and it's cool because you can watch on the screen, oh, I'm going through a left-hand sweeper. Outside shock is stiff, inside shock is soft.
Yep.
You tap the brakes, all of a sudden the rear suspension adjusts.
You got to give them credit. They have been in the electronic suspension game longer than anybody else has, so you know it's going to be durable, and
it delivers. It does deliver.
Suspension technology in terms of electronic suspension, Polaris, Skidoo, AIRTIMES.
Yes. So when it comes to gauges, we have a 10.25 from Skidoo. It does have built-in GPS for 2025.
And separate hot grips.
And separate hot
warmers are separated.
Yes. Those are separated, which is nice.
Yep.
From AIRTIMES, we have the Garmin-built G8, which is very, very unique and fully integrated GPS. And then we have the 7S from Polaris, the 7-inch display. So it's the smallest of the displays, but it's kind of the most long-standing when it comes to GPS.
Yeah.
So now,
some of the differences between these are pretty important.
These two are more similar than this is.
Absolutely they are, yes. So you have communication, sled-to-sled communication on the Polaris.
Texting.
Yes.
You
have sled-to-sled communication on the AIRTIMES that is voice if you're in America, if you're in the US. And you have their own headset. You can speak to the other sleds without a cell phone. It's pretty cool. You can also text from this one.
Yep.
Skidoo has no communication from the gauge.
Yes,
so
I believe that's correct.
You can't talk to other vehicles. These two both have excellent tracking of other vehicles in your group.
Yep, you can download the app for both of them, and you can for this one as well, and have your group ride. Everybody can show up if you download the app.
But I think these two really take that to a different level.
Well, the Garmin, in my opinion, with the topographical maps that are built in.
That is cool.
That is super cool. And then on top of that, bird's eye view, you can go into the Garmin Tread app, you can download like Google Earth images from satellites and plug that in right over top of your GPS as you're riding. There's all these extra things. There's like pitch and roll sensors built in, and you can see there's a track your dog app. So if your dog has a Garmin collar, you can see where he is. I mean,
and I already know that this is the one you like best.
It is.
And that is actually something about this gauge that takes away a point for me, is that there's too much junk on it.
There's a lot in it.
There's a lot of stuff. No, there's a web browser. I mean,
like, why not open up everything that's available and give you the kitchen sink? There's actually an app on there called Kitchen Sink.
Yes. One thing I do like is the engine diagnostics. You can see a lot of information about the engine on there, which is really great. I like that the gauge is bright and very sharp. It's definitely the sharpest display of all of them in terms of like...
It needs like a 15-degree tip back though.
But that is one of the big issues that I found riding it, is that the gauge is a long way from you and tipped down at a weird angle, that I find the gauge to be cluttered with information, the gauge portion.
I really like it. I really like the way it relays the information, and it is, I think in brightness wise, it's probably the sharpest and most pixelated. Like, there's the most pixels on there. It looks like an iPad.
It's the highest def screen for sure.
Yeah, it's very clear.
So the things I like about 7S are that the information that you want on the gauge screen is right there, and it's nothing that you don't want. It's all the stuff you do. It's customizable. This is too, but putting those little circles, you know, with the information, the widgets and everything, and the way you can lay them out, I get exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And not the information that I'm like, it doesn't seem cluttered. It seems very, very quick to read. I like that scrolling through all the different screens is easy, just with this one button.
I will say the interaction from the hand controls.
Yes.
You control the gauge. This one, you really need to touch the gauge to get what you want. The Polaris, you can adjust from your hand very easily and simply, and it's easy to use. Now, the funny thing is right now is that we're not talking about the Skidoo gauge at all.
Oops.
And I don't not like the Skidoo gauge.
That's right. I feel the same way.
I like it. I just feel like there's a lot more included features in both of these. If I'm checking that box and spending that extra money, which it's not cheap for these gauges when you get these packages.
So I think we should quantify that. The Skidoo has built-in GPS this year.
Yes.
But it has a limited feature GPS that's built in.
Okay.
You don't get all of the GPS features. You have to use the app if you want all of the features, all the functionalities of the GPS. You can see where you are, and I think you can follow a trail, but that's it.
Okay.
If you want anything else, you have to plug your phone in still. So that was a real big drawback for me with that. I'm glad that GPS is included, but it only is sort of included.
Right, and it does work with their headset. If you put their headset on your helmet, it works with the gauge right away, and your hand control.
Yes, they have a helmet with it built in from the factory. It's excellent systems for communication. And then you can use the
clip-on one too.
And there's one that's available for anybody else in your group that doesn't have the display. So that is excellent with built-in communication. So are we going to say a draw?
I think we got to call it a draw, because I know that, like, I'm amped on this one, and I know you like that one. So, which isn't bad. I mean, the reality is people are going to
just like really old and stubborn. Maybe I'm like Dad. I don't like new things anymore.
You said it, not me.
SnowTrax is brought to you by Princess Auto. Ideas, tools.
We have to talk about overall ride, because we did talk about suspension with technology, but we got to talk about how these sleds ride and handle, because you can put as much tech as you want on a poor handling snowmobile and it won't make it better.
Let's just talk front end for now.
Okay, just front end.
Then we'll go back and do the other part. But this is still the best handling snowmobile without technology. That, though, has come so far with that new front end.
REV is amazing.
It is phenomenal.
And maybe it's the ski together. I'm not sure, but REV has taken this to.
I would say that it's like 90 and 100 is how they lay out. I mean, it is.
Yeah, it's darn good.
So close. No technology. What one does great, the other one doesn't do as well. What the one does well, the other one doesn't. They're so close. But I would still give the edge to the Polaris. The Catalyst handles great on wide open, fast trails.
When they're worn in.
When they're worn in.
When it's cold in the morning or the evening and it's frozen up, this thing lifts the ski real bad.
There's something missing.
It grabs and it catches and it does things that are less than confidence
It takes a lot more work to go fast on this sled than it does these two. Could be something as simple as a new ski, very minor adjustments. It could be a skid frame. No technology handling. I think that we go like 1, 2, 3. We're not gonna, that's not our judgment, but that's just how I would lay them out with no technology. Throw the technology into it, what happens?
Yeah. You throw the technology in and the best gets better. I'm not sure that an XRS without SMART-SHOX doesn't handle just as good as with SMART-SHOX up front.
I had the opportunity at the intro to ride those two sleds back to back, one with and one without, and I preferred the one without.
Okay.
I thought that was really weird.
Yeah.
But I really honestly did feel that the one without, for some reason, just felt better in the front end.
Yep.
This though, this is better than it was before. With DYNAMIX, this sled handles better.
You feel it riding flatter.
Yes.
With the suspension. You feel that it does what it did before, but it does it better.
I find it's easier to go fast. Breaking into a corner, it stays more level, stable. I just think DYNAMIX has done wonders for the front end of this sled that was already best in class.
It's very good.
In terms of jumps in front end handling quality, that's one of the biggest jumps I've ever seen.
Polaris had to take the old Axis and go to a Matrix to get it to be this good. This one is still a G5. All they did was change some geometry up front. Yep. It kind of looks a lot more like that one up front.
Into corners that are bumpy, it doesn't get wildly out of control.
It doesn't do this. It doesn't lift. It doesn't lift.
The handlebars, when you're going through a corner with bumps, don't do this all the time. Yep. It's precise. It stays ridiculously flat. It is a fantastic handling snowmobile. So I think when you're talking about suspension combined with technology, in the front end, you got 1, 2, 3.
DYNAMIX delivers more performance than SMART-SHOX, in my opinion.
All right, so rear end?
Our Motion X is just freaking good. Like, it's unbeatable up to this point. Now, Pro CC with DYNAMIX in it
got better.
I would say how this got to 90% of that, that got to 90% of this, in my opinion.
I think that no technology, this was probably an 80% of that.
Yeah.
With DYNAMIX, this comes up to 90% of that. Yeah. And I honestly, I hate to say it, I keep saying this, I don't know how much good SMART-SHOX does on that sled to the rear end.
I'm not sure if it does either, because I've ridden sleds with just basic shock packages that have our Motion X,
and they
still work great. We know where we stand on these two, but when it comes to the Arctic Cat, I think the reality here, and again, I feel like we're beating up on Arctic, and I'm not doing it intentionally, but the slide action 137 skid is an old suspension. It just is. And I really feel like Arctic Cat is a rear suspension and a couple of tweaks to the front end, whether it be skis or different shock adjustments or whatever it is. But
these two companies have had a long time to refine these sleds, and Arctic Cat this is only the second year of the Catalyst, right?
First with an 858.
First with an 858. So I think if you give Arctic Cat a few more years and they're willing to invest a little bit more money into the rear skid suspension and the front end just tweaking it, then I think that there's a humongous potential here, because I love a lot of things about this sled. There are some things this sled does way better than anything else.
It's so light.
It is stupid light.
So light.
Ergonomically, it's amazing.
I fit on it great
over everything.
It's the best. It's the best looking.
Oh, it's the best looking
by
for
far.
sure. It's the coolest looking sled on the snow.
Yeah. And maybe the rear skid would change the way the front end rides, because that's a very real possibility.
That is true, and you can do a lot. Well, look at Lynx, right?
Absolutely.
You can do a lot with a skid. So
you change the whole feeling of the snowmobile. So
as far as rear end suspension goes, I think we still have to give the Skidoo the win. I think we do. I just think
the best.
It's still the best.
So it's Skidoo, Polaris, then Arctic Cat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yep.
SnowTrax has been brought to you by FXR, brings you more. MBRP Performance Exhaust, make your sled stand out. And by Arctic Cat, share our passion.
Considering that we're riding the most expensive non-turbo snowmobiles that you can buy from each manufacturer, I think we do have to talk about, refinement.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the Polaris is unrefined. I think it's very refined.
Yes.
And I think they've done a really good job at becoming more refined, especially with the Matrix platform.
Yep.
You know, year over year, they're fixing, tidying, making things cleaner, doing things nicer. I think Arctic Cat is, like we said, in their second year of production of a new platform.
This is a lot more refined.
Much better than
any Arctic Cat they've ever produced before.
Absolutely.
From a chassis, from a build quality, from a fit and finish, and of course from a power delivery standpoint. It is very refined for an Arctic Cat.
But there's still some vibrations you feel in the handlebars, still body lines that don't line up quite as tightly as they could. Then when it comes to the Skidoo, for me, and I know you know where I land on this, I mean, I look at things like the tunnel and the paint and link integration and the body panel fit and finish. Skidoo will change hand cluster switches every single flipping year.
Till they get it right. Build quality,
it's high.
Overall quality, fit and finish. I mean, everything about that sled is as good as any snowmobile will ever be. I really believe that. This isn't far off. This is close. but it's definitely not up to snuff with the Ski-Doo.
If I had to put my money down and pick one of these two sleds, after our numbers come down, I think I'd probably fall on the same side of it. I like the way that I fit on this snowmobile with my butt better, but I like the way my hands fall on that snowmobile and the way that I ride it better. All-day comfort out of my butt is not as important as going through a corner and being able to grab the handlebars and do what I want it to do. I definitely feel like the Polaris just inches out this sled.
And I would agree with you 100%. I think that that sled has become a sled that I used to go, it's fine, to a sled I think is really fun to ride and really great.
Yeah.
But I think overall, when you're talking about going fast and riding a sled and not thinking about what you're doing, you're just riding and everything's just flowing, this just does that better.
Yep.
But we've definitely tightened up. Everything's tightened up in terms of competition.
RES-RX changed the game.
It did. It's changed things a lot. And in the future, Ski-Doo, they're not just going to leave it alone.
Yep.
They're going to keep tweaking that thing because they're going to say, and hopefully they watch our show.
They will. We'll hear about it.
We'll hear about this, yeah, for sure. How dare you. We agree on what's important, right? What's important to a snowmobile experience, riding experience, what should be important to the average snowmobiler.
Yep.
And I think that this has got more of it, not by a lot, but it's definitely, and the points are going to show this. I mean, I think it's fair and square. And I think obviously people can argue all they want because there's different things people will feel. But the way we tested these back to back, there's no other more valid way to do it than what we did it. If you have the ability to do that and come to a different conclusion, good job. That's awesome.
No, when it comes down to it, they've done a great job. It's a really good sled. It works really well, performs really well. The motor is strong. And for the couple of things that maybe I like on other sleds, if it was parked in my garage, I'd be real happy, and I wouldn't say, why did I spend this money?
So yet again, we agree.
Yeah.
Weird.
Maybe on our next shootout we won't.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.